This is AV SuperFriends Perspectives, a collection of interviews, discussions, and presentations from conferences, trade shows, and events that just don't fit either of the other two shows. Some are long, some are short, but they'll all have valuable insights, useful information, or just good conversation with thought leaders and subject matter experts. And now, the AV SuperFriends.
All right, so we're here with Frank Lamo, Andy Bortz from University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Marc and I are pseudo-live, pre-recorded live.
It's live to these people.
It's live to tape.
Yeah.
This is all pre-recorded. We've pre-recorded Frank and Andy, and we will intersperse our conversations with theirs, and we'll see how that goes.
It should be entertaining.
Yeah. No, we're grabbing some recordings with some interesting people here at Northwest Met, NWMET. So we were just chatting kind of like how we want to go with this. You guys have had a very successful kind of, you've termed it RebelFlex. Congratulations on the cool branding. I've heard other ones which are nowhere near as cool.
Yeah, that one stands out. Right?
And so that's been a pretty successful hybrid deployment. So I guess my question would be, so we're just talking this. Okay, it's 2 years ago. You're doing the same thing again. What would you do differently? Different, like selection of hardware, software, the support side? Because I will say, I really like the fact that you have kind of that partnership going with the like required trainings, the pedagogical instructional side, because that's usually the part that's missing. People will go into a space and they'll just throw a bunch of stuff in the room and be like, look, we did it. Mm-hmm. Well, you did like a half of it, but where's the other half?
We actually had this discussion this morning right at breakfast. So from a hardware standpoint, we knew what we wanted because we knew what everybody else was using and what worked for them and what didn't work. Mm-hmm. We have great relationships with our manufacturers, so we know they're not going to throw any BS at us and what works. We get demo products, and we can talk to their engineers, and we can do what we want to do. So from a hardware standpoint, I don't think we would change much because we like to throw everything at our lecterns. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the project was so far success. But Andy was talking about earlier about the way our pilot was. We were working with other departments and online ed and such about training and all this. I'll let Andy talk about it, but I'll tee it up here. Tell them about what we were talking about this morning.
Well, I think one of the things that we really were trying to reanalyze after we did all the training was we initially trained everybody about the technical preparation, and we trained them about how to actually use the rooms themselves. We did that last.
These are instructors we're talking about. We're
talking about instructors, right. And then at the onset, we had actually worked with the Office of Online Education to do a training on pedagogical strategies for things like how do you keep a class engaged when you have two audiences in different places.
Which is like the most important piece of everything. It's awesome, like it's never thought about.
And how early, you said that was at the onset, so how early in that project, like post spring 2020, did you have that conversation?
It was honestly probably a month into the provost telling us, we need a big, bold plan. You, pointing to me, Frank, you need to get me an equipment list. I need to spend money. And then it went from that to, I'm knocking on his door, and I'm saying, okay, you got to get with the faculty center and figure this out. And then at that point, we basically formed our own little committee.
Nice.
Our provost, they brought in the registrar. They brought in online ed. We brought in Andy's group, my group. So we became our own little committee, met every week, every Monday, hour and a half every day, every Monday, and we went through everything that needed to get done. When everybody handled their own little stuff, we had the spreadsheets and the Google chats and all this stuff. But yeah, Andy, he tackled that with the faculty center immediately. He jumped right into that.
And we had to, because we knew that this was going to be a stretch to the imagination for a lot of our faculty, because we're talking about a time where everybody was in person. And then we're talking about a time we're doing emergency remote instruction, if you even want to call it remote instruction. It was just emergency instruction.
Just keeping it going.
And now it's the final exam. We're trying to tie those two things together. So how are you going to do that? With a little bit of training from our online education folks, we were able to give them some exposure to some activities that maybe were never implemented because everything was done in an emergency to go remote. So how do you fuse something together where you don't even know what kind of collaborative activities are on the table?
Sure.
So if we were going to redo it, though, if it was a couple years ago and we were deciding on a training strategy, I would have said, the rooms are equipped. Let's give them the background on what the rooms have, and then let's flip it around and do the pedagogical training last, so that way they can actually think to themselves, what does the room have that I can utilize to actually make those strategies go forward, instead of being overwhelmed at the onset with all of these new strategies for engagement.
So you guys were working through the concepts of how to teach remotely or how to teach online for people who had never done it, but they didn't have the spaces they could go into and see, try, touch, and kind of work on that, because those didn't show up till 6 or 8 months later.
Right. So that was our bite, because he's working on that, I can't put them in a room to test because we don't have any gear yet. So we built one out in the faculty center. That faculty center we just completed pre-COVID. So the room's done, ready to go. I just finished it out, and I'm ripping we didn't even turn the latch screw in the rack, and I'm already pulling the stuff out the front. And I'm getting every spare piece of gear and every demo piece from all the manufacturers, and we built our RebelFlex room. And he started to train folks in this faculty center while we're waiting on gear and while we're installing across campus.
How close was that demo space to the final form of what RebelFlex was?
100%.
Oh, it was exactly like
It was a carbon clone.
Nice.
Yeah, we would pull out things here and there and test some things. Boxes be failing, such and such. Touch panel. Mm-hmm. That's really all that they care. Like you said yesterday, the box of blinking lights is just a box of blinking lights.
Yeah.
That panel is exactly the same. That camera's in the same location. Those speakers and microphones do the same thing. That's what they wanted to see.
All the stuff they're interacting with was the same. So if you changed out the processor or the switcher,
they don't know.
They don't know that. Yeah.
But we thankfully didn't have to do any of that.
That familiarity was the golden ticket to even having this pilot program get off the ground, because we knew if there was going to be something that they would have to press too many more buttons than what they were used to, having not been in the classroom for over a year, I mean, that would have been really devastating, but everything was familiar.
We built two. We actually built one in our office. We have a training room sandbox in our office, and then we have one in the faculty center. So they actually did the trainings and the required demos or whatever you were doing in the first things with Melissa in our room. They actually used our room for it because we tore the other room apart. So it was a lot of, robbing Peter to pay Paul to get this thing up and running.
What was the faculty? Was there like high anxiety at that point? I'm always fascinated unpacking what that was, because there was always, when we lay out these new technologies, we'll offer the taste test. People will come in, and then they'll go through it and I'm fine with this. But none of my other people that I know are going to be okay with it. Did you get any of that? Because it's always a weird reaction when people themselves seem fine, but they want to speak for everybody else and say, oh, it's not going to work for them.
The cool part about this is this didn't get slammed down anybody's throat. This was a pilot, and they had to opt into it. So the university had the opportunity to put this out there.
Yeah.
We went public, made news posts in the faculty center, UNLV news, all this stuff, and basically said, this is the pilot program. This is what we're offering. Opt in. $500 stipend. So you're enticing the instructors.
You baited them. You baited them in. Yeah.
They got a $500 stipend.
A little bit of bribery there. No, that makes sense, because they're going to go spend their time.
Yeah.
Was this in addition to the courses they were already teaching?
No.
Okay.
So that was the online eds part, was to help them change their course study and their syllabus to work.
So the 500 was more of like, here's a little bit extra as an incentive to kind of work on this and see if we can get some people to participate.
Right.
Because you don't want to do a pilot and find you have 3 instructors.
Right. And the first one was 21, 22, and then the second semester, I think we're up into the 40s now.
Nice.
A lot of return people, and then a lot of people that are just trying it new because, so-and-so told them it was good. A couple departments really dove into it, like our accounting department. I think the whole department's using it.
Nice.
So,
do you need feedback from faculty on things that they would like to see different?
We've been doing surveys amongst them to try and understand exactly where the needs are that we haven't necessarily met
what's their
yet.
biggest complaint or their biggest wish or whatever?
I think if they had the opportunity to completely do it on their own, the big thing that comes up a lot is just more of a rich interaction between the in-person students and the remote students, and most of that is mainly because they need a little bit more training on how to engage those students, because the big thing that I get talked to a lot about is they're not participating. Nobody's putting their hands up.
If you're not dynamic in the room or at home, it's not going to matter.
Does your registrar call that anything in those rooms, like RebelFlex style, like modality? Like what do you, if I'm a faculty member and I want to schedule this room, what do I need to do and be aware of with my curriculum? How do I go about that from a registrar standpoint?
Well, and so that's an interesting thing, because when we initially called this RebelFlex, the initial connotation for it was it's going to be the type of classroom. And then it turned into a program name, and then it turned into a noun, like I want to be a RebelFlexer. So everybody was starting to use that term interchangeably. But if somebody wants to teach that way, ultimately what happens is they have to declare that they want to teach that way because of cataloging. They want to make sure that the students know that this is going to be offered in this modality, and that you have the 2 options of going into the remote section or going into the in-person section. And then from there, the registrar has a roster of all the rooms that are equipped to handle this modality, and they pretty much get priority access for being able to go into those spaces. They don't even have to necessarily be in the same building in which their office is located, but now that we've installed
they're
more
willing
rooms,
to go to a different building?
How about that,
seems kind of crazy to me.
Novel. Well, that's where
I want to do RebelFlex, but it has to be down the hall. Well, I'm not leaving the building.
So that's where my idiosyncrasies kicked in. I basically spread out, and we didn't just focus one place. I did 10 rooms in this building because there's 40 rooms in this building, so I took a quarter of that and we did that. That building there has 4 rooms. Let's do all 4 of those. That one's got 8. Let's do half of them. So we spread out, and we're across 9 buildings has a room now. So if you can't walk to one of those rooms,
you had mentioned there was kind of a split between, or not split. They were spread pretty evenly between general registrar scheduled rooms and some departmental spaces too.
We did 10 of the law school. So the whole law school only has 10 classrooms. We did all their rooms.
Did the whole thing.
And they paid their own money. So they took our design. We were done with our project, and they said we want that. So we went and ordered 10 more.
That's forward thinking.
Yep. Yeah. And then we went and did their 10 rooms, and then we did, during our project, we did 6 departmental rooms. What happened was it was pretty cool on our dean's part, I should say our provost part. Our provost reached out to the deans and said, hey, this is what UNLV is doing for our general purpose classrooms. Do you want to do any of this to your department rooms? We're going to pay for it with CARES Act money. 6 rooms, 3 departments came back to us and said we want to do this. So we did 6 rooms and that. And a lot of the other ones, they just said, no, we'll just use the GP rooms. Yeah. Okay, that was fine.
So we focused a lot on the academic side, of course, with all of these high-flex classes, these RebelFlex classes. Eventually, what started to happen as well, though, was the registrar was getting requests for events to be held in that kind of style. They were getting requests for department meetings to be hosted in these spaces. And that was one of the reasons why initially the registrar's office did not publicly disclose anywhere that these rooms were actually RebelFlex rooms, because they were still trying to organize a priority list for when those rooms could be booked and for what functions they could be booked for. So they picked up more traction beyond just a traditional class and enhancing it to a high-flex modality. Everybody wants to use them now for whatever reason. They'll find a reason to use them. Yeah. We built it. They came.
Yeah. Andy, how much are you involved with kind of that curriculum and syllabus thing? Are there any tips and tricks you'd tell to instructors that, hey, I want to do this. I've been teaching this curriculum for so long. What do I need to think about differently to have success in a RebelFlex space? What should I do differently?
Well, I will firsthand admit that this isn't my overall forte, not my overall specialty. I'm more on the troubleshooting end. But since we are on that subject,
it's not the way it works.
we can carry out some of the things that we've learned from the past with design and whatnot. But I think the big thing is just to double check and make sure that you are including all your audiences. You're not going to be able to incorporate one activity for one group and expect it to perform perfectly with others. A lot of instructors like to use breakout sessions. They want to have folks break out, but we had a lot of them ask us why they couldn't have people in the room collaborate with people outside of the room at the same time when a class was in session. The practicality is just not there. You can't do that because then you have too much crosstalk. So those kinds of activities, I think, were on the minds of the instructors, but they never were really executed to the way that would have been ideal for that activity to get the goals and the results they wanted. That ties me into the other thing, is keeping the goals and keeping them simple. Even when we were training the faculty on how to use the spaces, we really tried to make sure they focused on just a few core things. Can my audience see me? Can my audience hear me? Can my audience see my content? And vice versa. Once that happened, I think that allowed them to at least walk before they could run, and then they were able to start putting together how they could develop their syllabus further, especially if they were repeat RebelFlex instructors from fall to spring. So a lot of different modalities were trying to come into play here, but most of the time it was just pretty much a wing it and see what happens and then see what you could do for this spring.
It's kind of like what you said yesterday. What can this room do?
Right.
Yeah.
So we needed to know what we put in there can do, and they come with
what it can't do.
Right. And then when they come with the question, sorry, it's not designed to do that. Yeah. So unfortunately, that didn't happen. We built it, they used it, and it's really not gotten a lot of negative feedback to we want to change this or change that. It's like, so-and-so's at home and they can't hear me. Well, their Wi-Fi sucks. I mean, you can't, if you got 9 people on the call and one person's complaining, that person's got a problem at home. Don't blame the room for somebody that's 90 miles away. Right? You don't know.
Unless that person is the dean.
True, right.
At which point, Frank's getting in a car.
Yeah, no.
But that's usually a reflexive reaction, right? It's not working. The room's the fault.
They're always blaming the room, and then you have to put it into terminology that they understand. Like, think about it. If you're on a call with 90 people and everybody's in a different location, and 88 of those people are not having a problem, the problem's probably, you You.
Yeah, what's the simplest answer to that? Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So for the schools out there listening or kind of thinking about this, because it still surprises me. We're 2 years into this. We're almost past it at this point. But I don't know about you guys. My thinking is these are the rooms of the future. 20 years ago when you built a room, not every room got a projector. Now every room has a projector or display.
Yeah.
And now just every room is going to have some sort of collaborative technology in there. Just whether that's a full built-out RebelFlex style like you've done, multi-camera and ceiling array microphones and all the rest, or a stripped-down version of that, but some level of that capability is just going to be expected. Especially where you had a successful program and now someone may be teaching in another space that doesn't have that, but they'll still want that. So I get those calls now. We did over 150 spaces that have Zoom capability, and people walk in the room and say, I thought every room had Zoom. Like, no, there's 150 that don't. So for people listening, what would be your recommendations on how to best start this process? Or maybe they just threw in like as Justin mentioned yesterday, they did the dock cam with a microphone and aimed it at the room. Okay, well, that's like step 1 or step 0.
That was our emergency response.
Right. And everyone did that, but there's a lot of schools who did that and they're done. And I'm like, well, that's not...
It just sets that real low bar.
Yeah, and it's not really
good
solving
enough.
the issue. It's good enough for now, but to me now is like 3 months until you can get more stuff. But where do I start? I'm a school who did that and need to do the next step, and you guys have a successful program.
Personally, I think you missed the boat because you had CARES Act money to play with, and you were playing with house money, and at that point you could have did whatever the hell you wanted. I did dock cams and nothing. And some people really went nuts, and some people didn't, and that's fine. But if you had the advantage to get that money, you should have went and took advantage of it. You could support it later. You'll figure that out later. That's a support model issue that somebody else above you has to worry about. The problem is now you did that piecemeal, and you can't get what you want because there's a supply issue.
We bought it all. It's all gone.
Right?
Already.
It's already gone because people like me bought everything. B, price has now gone up. If you can get it, you're waiting for it. So at this point, to be honest, I think you need to get your plan in place, get your funding model in place, and you're waiting. And
get in line.
Get in line, because whatever bed you made, you're stuck with it, and it's not your fault because you didn't see all these things coming during COVID. But I mean, geez, look at us. We were 10 months behind COVID. We just sat back. Our school was like, let's just wait and see what's going to happen here. And then at that point, they were like, you know what? We're pulling the trigger. Here's money. We got CARES Act. Cool. Do something. So we waited 10 months. I watched 10 months of phone calls and Zoom calls and Hetna calls and all these calls that we were all on. What are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? Oh, I'm not doing that again. We're not doing that again. So I called Joe Way, and I called all these folks, Jim Spencer up in Notre Dame. I asked for his line drawings, for God's sakes. I was like, guys, what are we doing? And then he's like, well, this is what we did. This is what you guys can do, and this, that, and the other thing. So that 10 months was our learning curve. Yeah. And then we just came at it and deployed. We were ready to go when they pulled the trigger. You can't do that now.
Did you have any rooms that existed prior to that were basically the same configuration?
We had about 24 rooms that had lecture capture only. So we had the camera and the Panopto device and the lapel mic in there, and it was an auditorium. We had lecture capture.
Because I think going into it, what we did was an add-alt package that we had already offered for every one of our classrooms during all the construction we'd had previously. Yeah. So we knew we had a kit of parts that acted as a layer that we could put on top of our standard. I didn't know if you guys had an approach and you were just waiting to find it the perfect, opportune, scalable, tweaked version.
Yeah, so our kit of parts was the additional room would be a lecture capture room on top. It was a flavor 1, flavor 2, flavor 3.
Right.
Well, right now, our new flavor is this. But it's like you said earlier, it's scalable. So what I'm doing now in classrooms, when I'm building a new room, I'm not building that old system. The new system backbone that we have in a RebelFlex room is now what we're doing. Whether or not I put the microphone and camera in, that switcher's in, this is in, it's all ready to be added to. So I got my touch panel, my processor, and my switcher, and I'm done. If I want to add lecture capture, there's my output, there's my input.
You're not turning anything out to do it. You're just adding on top. Yeah.
So my classroom standard has dropped down in price. I got rid of the big DMPS that has half the box pieces that I don't use into it, right?
Yep.
And so now
you don't like using baby's first DSP in there?
Right. So we use a third port. We use Biamp for our DSP. So we do everything ad hoc now. So we have our baby flavor, and now you want to add lecture capture? I add this part and this part and this part and do that. I want to add RebelFlex? I add that, and now I add this. So that's
Do
how
you
we're
call the
doing it.
basic one BabyFlex? Because that
Yeah. You know what?
Maybe it's another registered trademark.
Hashtag Chris got that trademark. So yeah.
well, you said that you got the baby flavor. I was like, how about BabyFlex in there?
Right?
So-
Baby flex,
Yeah.
mama flex, baby flex, papa flex. You know?
Well, it's an interesting way to approach it, though. I mean, from the standpoint of it's functionally all the same thing. You're just layering in on top of that. So your support model is pretty much the same. There's familiarity to instructors as they go from space to space. The room may not have all the features, but it works the same way. So so that really fits into kind of what we were talking about yesterday, the idea of like flexible campus-wide standards.
Yeah.
And even though there's that concern of not every room has to be physically the same, but if the experience is similar enough, and I teach in a room that's not RebelFlex, but it works the same for presentation. I go down the hall and it's RebelFlex. It's 90% the same, and I'm good to go.
Yeah, it's all user experience for us, and we're going to have a transition now because we have the existing rooms. That touch panel and layout is very different now than the new one. My guys are going to go back, and they're going to put that panel, that firmware and that GUI onto the old panels, so it's going to look new, but half the features are not not there.
Just don't have those buttons.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're going to do that. That's our summer project, is for them to go back and update firmware and do all that on touch panels and.
So before we kind of get ready to close out here, can you speak a little bit how you're configured as your org? You guys speak that you're doing a lot of stuff in-house, and I've sensed there's been troubles with a lot of universities that have outsourced a lot of their stuff, being able to scale in solutions because they've already just taken whatever was given to them in the past. And you seem like you have a pretty tight shop that you're doing everything kind of in-house. Is that true, or can you just give us a rundown of what you have?
I got there
operating?
10 years ago. When I got there 10 years ago, we were extremely siloed. And what I mean by that is within OIT, we were extremely siloed. Network people talk to network people and only network people. The people that were in my area, only we dealt with plan construction, and that was about it. And I mean, OIT was a 4-letter word. So I mean, it was really like that, and it was siloed. But when I came on board, we started building all these projects. I'm working with plan construction, and I'm the guy now that has to get that guy to talk to that guy. So I turned into like a psychologist at some point, right? So over the years,
I believe we just call that project management.
right? Vendor management, project management, right? Over the years, the early years, when we were doing our standard build out, we got better with our relationships. We started to realize what each other does. But Andy's group and my group, his group didn't exist. So a few years ago, under our AD,
It was just Andy in an empty room.
right? It was just
Hanging out
It was no one actually.
Andy was nowhere near Las Vegas.
Yeah. So the group that I'm in, the silo that I'm in under teaching and learning. So there's a group that does computer labs. There's a group of classroom technologies, and there's the learning folks with Andy. So the three of us all go up to one. So we're in this umbrella. So Andy and I, we're side by side through this whole project, and that was awesome. And that's
Just ignore
stay.
the computer guys.
The computer guys,
kidding.
to be honest. So the guys that are in that department, we actually put RebelFlex rooms in a few of those computer labs, and we had limited conversations with them because they didn't care. They were worried about the rows of seats for the students.
Sure.
That instructor station is still my problem, not theirs.
Yeah.
So that is something that we had working on. It was a long-term investment. Building the relationship with the network folks now, because my lectern's a mini IDF. I got a 24-port switch in that now. I got 18 devices talking to that. They had to approve that switch. They had to make sure that we have bandwidth and all that sort of stuff. So now I got all this stuff on campus. I need these network guys. They're now my new best friends. Because
absolutely.
There's been some organizational changes within our university, and some folks that were there that were the foot stompers that said, we can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. Well, they're not there anymore. And the new people are like, we can absolutely do that. You're my guy. Slack channel, boom, this is us now.
Yep.
You need something updated, boom, it's on Slack, it's done. So we've really built a good team and a lot of good departments that people are starting to talk and listen to each other. And I think the fact that this RebelFlex project had so many different people and stakeholders involved, everybody now talks to everybody. There's no more that's your problem.
If nothing else, everyone kind of had a common purpose. They all recognized that okay, we're all addressing COVID. How are we all part of the same team?
Yeah.
As opposed to if you were trying to do this same sort of lift without that, even if you had the funding and all the rest, there'd be these political battles of like, well, I don't care about that. That's your problem, sort of thing. So
yeah, the political part of it within the department itself is pretty much getting dissolved. There's not I can't say there's not a lot of it, but there was when I got there. Everybody, like I said, was siloed. Now there's a lot more cohesiveness. There's a lot more groups that talk to each other. Some of the old guard is gone. Some of the new guards coming in, working their way up and such. I think it's a good thing for us in our group, but it's very hard for some schools. Some schools are so siloed. Yeah. I hear the pain points, and I'm like, man, I was there. I know what it's like. And you know what you do? You got to stomp your feet. You got to get in people's faces. You got to crash meetings like you did. Hey, Go find out what that guy drinks. Go find out where he hangs out.
Yeah, you mentioned that yesterday. That's a
Right?
good point.
I'm not ashamed to say I dropped a bottle of liquor on somebody's desk before and said, hey, thanks for helping me out on that project. They remember that stuff. You know, it's relationships. It's just the way it is.
That's how it is. It's leadership, it's influence, it's trust, it's all those things. It's not just about all the stuff anymore, right? So this relationship piece becomes ever more important as we move forward.
Yeah.
And I think you guys are kind of positioned really in a good spot, and people should look at that as a model, is that, you know, think twice before you're going to start farming all this stuff out, because when's the next pandemic going to come along, and when do you need this knowledge in-house? And if you don't have it, you're going to pay out the ass to get it somewhere else.
We farm out our installs, so we just don't have the bandwidth or the manpower to do installs.
Right.
We don't do that, but we manage them. We're on top of them. So our design is in-house.
But you do the design, you do the engineering, the consulting, the working with faculty, the programming, all the critical components. What do you call it? The knowledge.
The knowledge part. Yeah.
Typically, I'll be the designer. Joe Kroback, our other AV system specialist, will be the designer. We have our own programmers in-house. Programming and design, we do it at the same time, because I want to know how my programmer going to do this. He tells me, let's not use that box. Let's use this box. So I'm just not a guy that's doing the design line drawings now. My programmer is helping me with those line drawings. My programmer is selecting equipment. I can now focus a little bit more on getting the job done, getting the contractors hired, getting all that done. Then once the product shows up, the integrator's there. My project managers can do that. My designer can do that. My programmer, any one of us are now familiar with the project. Anybody can go over and hop over to that project, make sure it's getting done right.
Right.
So it really is a team. Everybody covers each other's ass, and we get it done.
So Andy, you said your department wasn't there. You weren't there. There was no. You didn't. Your group didn't exist.
Originally, it didn't exist.
Yeah, the
correct.
manager has now had almost a completely different role. When this happened, they threw it under him, and that's when Andy got here.
Yeah, that my whole job started basically because our university said, well, we're getting content management services, we're getting web conferencing services. We have nobody to service them though. So that's when that position was posted.
Yeah, so it was deliberately created in that same under that same umbrella.
When we started lecture capture and we brought Panopto on board, Frank, with his bright ideas of getting Panopto, went, oh shit. Who's going to run this?
Somebody has to own this.
Who's going to do this?
Stuff,
so Scott, my boss at the time, and then his boss above him, they were like, okay, so we got to bring somebody in. So that's when we put the hire out and we got Andy.
So your role has always been very instructor client facing, interfacing with that, building that relationship. So when it came time to address COVID, you were basically perfectly positioned to continue that.
Oh man, the door fell over. Basically, with all the knocks on it. Because, Andy, what do we do? What do we do?
Yep.
We have to go remote now. How are we going to do this? Does everybody have accounts? Does everybody have content management accounts? And so on we went.
Yeah, it went from nobody listening to us to people wanting to know, what do we do?
Well, we discussed that yesterday with now people kind of, if even if it's begrudgingly, they kind of get what we do for campuses.
Yep.
So, all right.
Yeah.
Mark, any last thoughts?
No, I think we've got a good chunk of golden content here from these fellas, and so. But before we get off here, if people want to reach out to you, contact you, what's a good way to get a hold of both of you guys?
Nobody's calling me.
Nobody's going to call you.
Nobody can
People want to talk to you.
People can't
Frank.
afford me. No, I mean, most folks can find me on LinkedIn. It's Frank, my last name, ALAIMO. That's the easiest way to get in touch with me, is to find me on LinkedIn. You can find me. I follow these guys. They follow me. So yeah.
Same here. Andrew Bortz on LinkedIn. BORTS. Have to make sure it's not a Z.
Is there another Andrew Bortz with a Z?
There's lots of Bortzes with Z's all over the place. I'm one of the few with an S.
All right.
If there's an Andy, we'll have to get them together and have a Thunderdome, see who owns the name. So.
Oh boy, bring it on.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for coming along, and
Hey, thanks for having me.
Great to be here.
Yeah, enjoyed having you, and hopefully you guys have another good day at Northwest Met here. All right.
Appreciate
You too.
it. Thanks,
Thank
gents.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Well, that wraps up another episode of AV Super Friends Perspectives. If you have a perspective to share, you can contact us with questions, topic ideas, or general complaints at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com.
Nice work, everyone. Sharp broadcast. Really good. Everyone on the floor as well. Really a lot of hustle. I liked it.
The opinions expressed by the AV Super Friends are solely those of the individuals and do not represent their respective institutions, organizations, companies, or clients.